Welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. Today marks the beginning of the Republican National Convention, which I think it is safe to characterize it as absurdist even before it begins. We're going to get Donald Trump each of the 4 nights, allegedly. Many members of the Trump family. It was interesting when they rolled out the first 12 speakers. Fully 6 of them were members of the Trump family. And then, of course, the convention has decided that it's going to forego having any sort of a platform, instead essentially saying, hey, we're with this guy. Whatever he says, we are all in. And it feels like it's been 4 years getting here. So this weekend was the calm between these quasi-virtual conventions. But, we have to just note other things going on, these massive wildfires that are taking place in California. We have the audio tape of the president's sister. We have bickering over the Rose Garden redo. There's a fight over the Postal Service, which is going to flare up again later today. A politicized Food and Drug Administration. And we probably should note this every single day, because we are at the moment where more than 177,000 Americans have died from the coronavirus. And so far this month, August, we have been averaging more than 1,000 deaths a day and about 50,000 new infections. There's a new model. Well, the model that we've been using is now projecting more than 250,000 deaths, American deaths by Election Day, and nearly 310,000 by December 1st. And over the weekend, there was a poll that found that 57% of Republicans said that the number of pandemic deaths was acceptable. It was 90-10. Democrats said, of course, it's not acceptable. But 57% of Republicans said the number of pandemic deaths was acceptable. Okay, so let's just dive into the week in the convention, and we are joined. We're very fortunate to be joined today by former Florida Congressman David Jolly. Good to have you back, David.
Good to be with you, Charlie.
Speaking to us from Pennsylvania, and our own Amanda Carpenter, CNN contributor, political columnist for the Bulwark, who is speaking to us from the wilds of West Virginia.
Hello.
I was kind of going to propose the banjo things, and I'm in Wisconsin. So we have West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania all covered here. So let's just start off with I'm sorry, I keep coming back to that somehow, weirdly enough, it's not a parody that the Republican Party said, yeah, we're not going to bother with a platform. Resolved that the Republican Party has and will continue to enthusiastically support the president's America First agenda. Resolved that the 2020 Republican National Convention will adjourn without adopting a new platform until the 2024 Republican National Convention. So, David, I mean, we really just sort of officially, given up, like we don't have any ideas or principles or ideology or any issues that we're talking about. We're just basically a cult. Whatever the president does, whatever he doesn't do, whatever he bleeps up, we're with him.
Yeah, Charlie, look, there's the cultural response, and then there's the intellectual response. The cultural response is to affirm exactly what you just said, that Donald Trump is a vacuous leader with no ideas. It is whatever suits him in the moment will suit the Republican Party, and we have a coalition of voters within the GOP that will celebrate whatever he says. If you take a longer-term historical perspective, the last time the Republican Party, in my opinion, really had significant ideas on the conservative spectrum that they tried to advance were the very early days of Bush 43, coming off an electoral college loss, the Supreme Court giving Bush the nod, but at least he leaned in with a domestic policy agenda. Truly, we remember the Bush 43 years for 9/11 and Iraq and Afghanistan. Everything changed on September 11th, but he was leaning in as a conservative domestic policy president, leading with education, with some real conservative principles around education. Recall his tax plan led with lowering the marginal tax rate for the lowest income earners. This was at least the makings of an ideas party, but obviously the national security event sidetracked that. And then as you got into 2006, the economic collapse, the emergence of Barack Obama, and the emergence of the Tea Party, we really have not had as a party any new ideas within the Republican Party. And if you even look at what Trump has implemented, it very much has been the conservative policies that any Republican president would have pursued naturally. There's nothing revolutionary or life-changing about what this party has stood for under Donald Trump. And I think the announcement that there would not be a platform is simply an affirmation of that.
Okay, Amanda.
I mean, it's really the perfect symbol of the Trump era. There is no policy plan. It's entirely a party united around his personality. And that's really it. That's all that's going on here. And, you know, when I talk with my husband, we talk about this all the time. Donald Trump could have been a great president. And I say that with the utmost sincerity. If he could have put his personality aside, he could have put his presidency on autopilot and just let the regular Republicans run things. I mean, the people that confirmed his judges, the people that got his tax cut plan through, if he just would have taken a backseat and done the rallies, he could have kept the good economy going. He would have listened to the experts on coronavirus. He'd be rolling and he'd be proving all us, sucker, never Trump Republicans wrong. But he never did that. What he did is that he shrank the party. A lot of people talk about having a big tent. And there used to be the old saying that I didn't leave the Republican Party, it left me. Well, Donald Trump shoved good Republicans out of the tent because people like David Jolly couldn't abide by it. I'd like you to speak to that. We can't stay in the tent, so we got shoved out. And that's all that's left is Donald Trump's bad personality and the people that follow him and think that if they stay in this tent, they can remain in the cool kids club.
Yeah, I'm of course, he could have been a great president. It's sort of like you could have a ham sandwich if you had some ham, if you had some bread. I mean, he was never going to be capable of that. And I guess I'm not sure that just sort of leaving the policy in charge of the other guys, in retrospect would have worked, because as you look back on it, you wonder, did the Republicans really have a governing philosophy? Would they have just gone ahead and repealed Obamacare? What would they have come up with? Did they really have any ideas? Hey, you guys have probably seen, and we're going to talk to him later this week, Tim Alberta has just this searing piece in Politico magazine. I mean, it is an absolute must read. And he starts off, and I'm really grateful for this, and I'm guessing you guys are going to identify with this as well. He's doing some sort of a conference call, a Zoom call with some high school students, talking about politics. And the 17-year-old kid sort of stops him in his tracks and says, look, I'm not clear about this. What do Republicans actually believe? What does it mean to be a Republican? And he's basically stopped and realized he's been writing about this, for decades. He's written the book about the rise of the Republican Party, and he couldn't answer it. He said, identifying the intellectual vacuum is easy enough. Far more difficult is answering the question of what quite specifically has filled it. Bumbling through a homily about the culture wars, a horribly overused cliche, I felt exposed, despite spending more than a decade studying the Republican Party, embedding myself both with its generals and its foot soldiers, reporting on the right as closely as anyone. I did not have a good answer to the student's question. So then he calls up Frank Luntz, the Republican pollster. Saying, okay, can you give me an answer to all of this? And I know that, Amanda, you've read this response. He said, maybe nobody alive has spent more time polling Republican voters and counseling Republican politicians than Frank Luntz, the 58-year-old focus group guru. And so we asked him, he said, if anybody has an answer, it would be Luntz. This is what, Luntz says. I don't have a history of dodging questions, but I don't know how to answer that, Luntz said. There is no consistent philosophy. You can't say it's about making America great again at the time of COVID and economic distress and social unrest. It's just not credible. I think it's about promoting, and he stops suddenly. No, but I can't. That's the best I can do. So he starts pressing Luntz. No, come on, give me a better answer than that. Luntz sounded exasperated. He said, look, I'm the guy who's going to give you the straight answer. I don't give a shit. I had a stroke in January, so there's nothing that anyone can do to me to make my life suck. I've tried to give you an answer, and I can't do it. You can ask it any different way, but I don't know the answer. For the first time in my life, I don't know the answer. I know, and I felt affirmed because, people ask me, are you still a Republican? What the hell does it mean anymore, honestly? I mean, David, doesn't this kind of go like, how do you answer that question anymore,
Charlie, I'm laughing because I think it affirms each of our experiences, you, Amanda,
Yeah.
myself, a number of the other folks you might see, the talking heads, former Republicans. But it also raises a question that I think is very important for the party's self-reflection, if there could be any, which is, did the abandonment of principles occur with Donald Trump or before Donald Trump? And our friend Michael Steele and I were on MSNBC earlier this week, and we had a little different take on that. He suggested it more turned the corner with Donald Trump, but my experience in Congress was that it had turned the corner before Trump. And what I mean by that is, I worked with the Congress for about 20 years in just about every capacity. And it wasn't until I served as a member when I realized just how broken, one, the institution was, but the Republican Party was. And there are two votes that I will never forget as examples of that. One was, there was a Medicare fix that was going to cost a couple $100 billion. And for a year, Republicans had said, we got to figure out how to pay for it. Finally, they just brought it up for a vote with an hour's notice without having any way to pay for it. And during that same week or two, they brought up the estate tax repeal. And Republicans didn't want to pay for a tax cut. All in all, it was about $500 billion in additional debt that Republicans were voting for. And I went to I'll say it. I went to Paul Ryan and I said, how are we paying for this? Now, this was under Boehner's speakership. Ryan's the Ways and Means chairman. And he said, well, we're not going to worry about that right now. And I thought, and in this case, Charlie, I was a co-sponsor of the estate tax repeal because ideologically I agreed with it, but I actually voted against a bill I had co-sponsored when it came to the floor because my party was doing it recklessly and irresponsibly. There also was during the leadership elections when Boehner resigned. Everybody's jockeying to get people's votes for leadership. And I asked a member of the current GOP leadership, tell me when we're going to move immigration reform and you have my vote. And he screamed at me and said, do you know what the American people would do to us if we passed immigration reform? Those are two examples on a couple major policy issues, right? Immigration reform and taxes, where around 2013, 14, 15, Republicans had already confessed, at least privately to themselves, no, none of these principles we've talked about for the past generation are real anymore. That was the proving ground in which Donald Trump emerged and was able. People say he hijacked the party. He didn't. He walked right through the front door of a party that welcomed him with open arms.
That was during the period when the outrage machines really began to dominate the debate, the fundraising, the clicks, and the pressure on the members of Congress not to actually do anything, but to constantly be angry and to be looking for ways in which they're being betrayed. So, Amanda, you have a great piece up at the Bulwark today, which looks ahead at this convention. And I think it's a safe bet that we are going to see a lot of anger and a lot of fear. The Trump campaign is going all in on this sense of fear. Give me your preview of what we can expect. A lot of burning cities. Democrats hate America and God and want to destroy everything that is good and beautiful.
Yeah, well, I will say the campaign is signaling for the millionth time that there will be a new tone. I know it's your favorite, Charlie.
Yeah.
They're going to have a hopeful, optimistic vision. Yeah, that'll last for about 2 seconds because we know what the default mode of this campaign is, which is the liberal mob is going to storm the suburbs and Cory Booker is going to rob your house or something like that. But I'm always reminded of what this will look like because I spent so much time watching the production of the rallies over the summer. And if you go back to the Turning Point rally hosted by Charlie Kirk, who's one of the speakers tonight in Arizona earlier this year, there was this long, very dramatic montage that introduced Donald Trump, which essentially did all the work of depicting the liberals as, the evil Antifa mob, and Donald Trump, the guy with a storied baseball career. There's actually a nod to his athleticism as a high schooler in this video, which shows you how strange it is. He's the hero that's going to save us. And so I would almost expect to see that same montage appear tonight because that's really all they have. Donald Trump cannot have a positive campaign. There's a reason he can never answer the question about what he would do in a second term is because he can't even admit there were shortcomings with his first term. So all he can do, he has no record to run on, is try to take Joe Biden down. And so I just really question that strategy, though. We know how that story ends because we saw what happened in the 2018 midterm elections. Donald Trump tried the same play. I don't know if you guys remember, the caravan was coming. He was going to send the National Guard down to the border, and then they got creamed. Democrats won by the biggest voting margin in history. They flipped 41
won in the Senate seats, though. They picked up Senate seats, so it worked in some areas.
Well, he got impeached because this worked so well, right? I mean, I don't think that is a success, but he is trying the same strategy now. You can just substitute the National Guard members going to the border with the law enforcement he wants to send to polling stations to stop voter fraud. And so it's also predictable, but it's still going to be really strange to watch.
You ask in the article, as we near the last 2 months of the campaign, though, who are voters really afraid of? See, this is the thing, that if you're stoking fear, are they looking at Donald Trump and saying he's our savior, or he's the guy that's created the environment that is so scary?
Yeah, I think to a lot of people, he is the boogeyman this time around.
Okay. So what do you think, David Jolly? Does this work?
No, it doesn't. And I think there is a missed opportunity. If I look, I'm no longer a Republican, right? But if I were to put on my Republican hat, I would say there's a strategy that is right in front of them that they're missing. And it's this. I agree with Amanda. Republicans under Donald Trump are going to go into this week looking to divide the nation. Instead, they should be looking to divide Democrats. And what I mean by that is this. The Democratic National Convention was a success of unity. And if you look even at Joe Biden's remarks, they had spent the first 3 weeks giving everybody a little something that worked for them, right? The moderates got a little something, the progressives got a little something, the environmentalists, labor, everybody got a little something. Joe Biden never waded into the natural debate that's always there within parties, the left wing versus the moderates, right? He kind of rose above it, and he spoke to the broader themes of dignity in office and renewed leadership and one America. Well, you can do that when you control the mic all 4 nights, just like Republicans can, right? And it was a great success, I think. But if Republicans focused in on what do Democrats really stand for, not in pure contrast to Republicans, but among Democrats, are they going to raise taxes to pay for expanded health care and education? Joe Biden, when he was on stage at the Miami debate, raised his hand to say he would provide health care to undocumented individuals. Those are issues even within the Democratic Party that begin to tear at the fabric of that unity we saw last week. The contrast between Republicans and Democrats that Amanda speaks to is not working. It's why Joe Biden is up 8 points, because if it's a contrast between the two candidates and the two parties, Joe Biden wins this thing. People are tired of Trump's America, but he has an opportunity to divide Democrats.
Okay. Amanda?
Oh, no, I have a question because I feel like people like me and Charlie always have to answer it. And I noticed you said, I don't consider myself to be a Republican, but I imagine your values haven't changed at all. So why do you not identify as a Republican anymore? Because when I'm asked, I say, well, I'm still who I am. I'm a Republican. I'm just not a Trump fanatic.
Oh, so look, I left for a number of reasons. First, on policy, I guess I was always a moderate, though whatever the labels mean. I mean, when I was in Congress, I supported marriage equality and immigration reform, campaign finance reform, climate science, LGBT, all that stuff. So I was already in a minority. Trumpism was a breaking point for me for all the reasons we know. But even now, so I left the party 2 years ago. And even now, I can't see returning to it because I will never trust the leadership of the Rubios and the Rick Scotts and the Josh Hawleys and the Kevin McCarthy's and Steve Scalise's, those who have elevated and celebrated Trump in a moment of national crisis. To me, that says this is a party unable to lead. And I'll tell you,
That's
Amanda,
where I am
the
too.
final part that I love, I love this. People say, are you going to become a Democrat? It's not that I'm not ready to become a Democrat. It's that I'm not ready to become a partisan again. The enlightenment of the last 2 years for me has been also the rejection of partisanship, because though the values are easy to reject within the Republican Party now in contrast to the Democrats, it's still easy for me to reject partisanship because that has caused so much of the problems we have today.
Yeah, no, I think I'm pretty much in the same place there on all of that. You know, I thought the Democratic convention was a reasonable success. I thought Biden's speech was very, very effective. David, are you all at all concerned that he didn't get a bounce out of the convention? I'll get Amanda's take on that too. No bounce. CBS YouGov poll shows him up by 12 points, 50 to 42, but no movement. Any reason for concern?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I don't know that there's a lot of persuadable voters still out there. I'm in that camp that I think most people have made up their mind on these very top level vision issues, right? Are we going in the right direction or not? I think most people know that, and that's informed their vote. As successful as the virtual convention was, given all the challenges of a virtual convention, you also lose a lot of the energy, to be honest. I think if you're a medium to high intensity Politico or voter, you watched. If not, you really didn't, which is where I think the one opportunity still out there is to educate people on policy. I mean, Joe Biden said today he won't raise taxes on anyone over $400,000 or under $400,000 in income. That's smart, right? That's a smart move. But where are there vulnerabilities that could peel off some Biden voters? I think that's an opportunity this week.
Yeah, Amanda, no bounce. Thoughts?
Yeah, I just think the conventions are hard for regular people to watch. Everything is so divided. People's minds are made up. They know Joe Biden. They don't need to tune in to see Joe Biden give a speech to figure out who he is. And so I agree with David. Things are pretty well settled. And just, as someone who loves politics and follows politics and obsesses about politics, 4 days of that programming was hard to watch. I mean, a lot of it was really emotional. If I didn't need to watch, I would have turned it off, quite frankly, because it is just times are so hard right now. Everyone is already stressed out and anxious, and just watching this be poured over you again kind of makes it worse.
Well, also, be honest about it. Most people didn't watch the actual convention that much in the old days. I mean, it was this made you focus on. I did think that there were some numbers showing that he'd raised his favorabilities, that Democrats felt more comfortable with him. So, in terms of shoring up some of his, some of the questions, some of the softness, I think he probably did himself some good. As an indication, by the way, this is almost like a sideline, but I wrote about it in my newsletter today. The is an indication of how effective that speech was, that you had guys like Rush Limbaugh, just like pause there to think about all the implications there, suggesting that, well, he couldn't have given that live. That must have been taped. And this is picked up by a few internet trolls and right-wing sites where people believe that's right. He couldn't have possibly done that because, we've invested all of this in saying that he's stumbling and bumbling and couldn't possibly speak for 20 minutes without making some massive gaffe. So, what's our explanation? Well, that it's all a hoax. It's kind of like a faked moon landing. What's weird about this is two things. Number one, there were 36 reporters there. There were Secret Service agents there. There were staffers. All kinds of people were there. So it's easily refutable, right? I mean, it's not just a lie. It's a demonstrable lie. And yet, as both of you know, right now, millions of people believe that. Just like millions of people believe that the Democrats dropped the under God from the Pledge of Allegiance, even though there are videotapes out there showing them saying it over and over and over again. That's why I said, we are afloat in an ocean of bullshit, and we need to understand that as we go into these last 2 months of the campaign, there are two absolute alternative reality here, and you can't break through. You cannot. Joe Walsh had an interesting tweet. If you saw that, he said, I have 1.1 million followers on Facebook. And I pointed out and showed them evidence that, in fact, the Democrats had said under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. He said 90% of the responses I got, or maybe he said 99%, were saying, no, you're lying. The president is telling the truth. Even when you present them with the evidence, it doesn't make a difference. So we just need to acknowledge where we are at in this toxic political environment.
Yeah, Charlie, I'd add something to that. It's easy And it's natural for us to think. I do it all the time. Like, how gullible can you be? How can people really believe that? And you get disappointed almost in the body politic. But I think when we have those moments, we have to redirect our anger to the leader that is delivering that message, right? Because it really is a test of leadership. We haven't had presidents and people in power, even within the media, in generations past, that have spewed that type of lie. And in many ways, as Americans, we've been brought up, rightfully so, we should be proud of that we can trust our political leaders and that we don't have to follow the news every day. And if we pick up statements here and there from our leaders, there's this baseline expectation that our leaders tell us the truth. That's
not anymore.
the indictment of the president today, is that it's the president that has created this environment, and he's using voters who have otherwise been brought up to trust their leaders.
Yeah. Okay. So, Amanda, I saw that you were on CNN over the weekend and you're commenting on the challenge that the networks face in broadcasting this Republican convention, particularly when you have the president speaking 4 nights in a row. So you kind of know what's coming. And how do the networks handle a blizzard of bullshit that's coming their way?
Well, the blizzard isn't an abnormal weather event when it comes to Donald Trump in the news. But what makes the conventions different and what I'm extremely worried about is the blatant disinformation we can expect in regard to election rigging and coronavirus. I think that's actually a very bright line where the news networks would have to intervene, because when Donald Trump has a national platform to spread information that literally hurts our health and democracy, I think at that point you got to break in. I would break in with medical experts. I would break in with election integrity experts, because there do need to be standards. And I really wish the news networks would have a plan to do that. And that's what I suggested on CNN the other day. Because listen, if Donald Trump wants to stand up and talk about Joe Biden being in the basement and how the Democrats are evil people, fine. That's abysmal, but okay. But when you're spreading disinformation that can hurt people, particularly when it comes to coronavirus, I'm very worried about Kristi Noem being given a national platform. She's a South Dakota governor who is a rising star in Trump world, and her calling card, the reason why she is becoming famous, is because she is resistant to lockdowns, masking, and social distancing. And she is literally telling people that she has followed the science to make those decisions. And you know what? Maybe she has more leeway in South Dakota because it's a rural state. There aren't a lot of people. But when she takes that message into the cities and suburbs and acts like that is something that should be done in New York, in highly populated areas that have seen devastation, mass death events, I think that's extremely dangerous. And she's doing it. She's gone to rallies in Pennsylvania for Trump's reelection, no masking, taking selfies with people. And I view her quite literally as a dangerous actor right now.
And it is weird that she is on that list. David, have you had a chance to go through the list of speakers? Because it's a very unusual, it's a very interesting list, who's on and who's off that list.
It is, but look, I mean, what's left within the Republican Party? Where would you reach to for a credible Republican that could deliver a message?
Why is Ted Cruz not a speaker?
Well, Nikki Haley's going to try, which is going to be really interesting to watch. That's on my list.
And she's in one of the very few people in sort of her category of a prominent leader. A lot of staffers, a lot of family members, a lot of the Charlie Kirk type hacks. But it is interesting. Josh Hawley's not there. Ted Cruz is not there. It really seems a very narrow band of Trumpist loyalists, people who want to go all in. I mean, there's a couple of outliers. Tim Scott, is speaking, but it's very weird. I don't know. Mike Pompeo, the acting, the real Secretary of State, is apparently going to be speaking from an official diplomatic mission in Jerusalem. So, forget any norms that we've ever had about secretaries of state or the use of the White House or anything. But I don't know that makes any difference anymore, does it, David? I mean, we've blown through so many norms. Does anybody care anymore?
Oh, look, I think the number of either violations of statute or violations of ethics we're going to see this week in use of government resources is going to be right in front of our face. But to your point, those norms don't matter anymore. But I would say those norms don't matter because of the Republican allies on Capitol Hill who have affirmed an environment where they don't matter. I was having this conversation the other day about so much of Trumpism. The reason it doesn't matter is because we have a party that otherwise would have stood up to this in the past that failed to. And so that provides permission and affirmation. I think the big challenge for each of the speakers this week, and I agree with Amanda, I think there will be careers not ruined within the Republican Party, but possibly ruined in terms of higher office this week at the convention. But the question is there anything new or noteworthy Trump will deliver? We know his speech. Yes. We can all recite it, right, word by word. And will there be any weight given to his nomination address? And I think that answer is no. I think where they're going to reach for impact is around the TV production, right? The reality TV star effects. And that will work with the people who are attracted to Trump anyway. I think it'll turn off a lot of people who otherwise might be tuning in to say, hey, I'll give this guy 30 minutes of my time to see what he has to say.
This is a good point, Amanda, because the rule of thumb with Trump is the more exposure he gets, the worse he does in the polls, right? When he actually disappears for a while, his numbers start to creep up again, but they're going all in. It's going to be all Trump every single night. What can he possibly say? I mean, the guy has been grotesquely overexposed over the last couple of months. We've seen how that's worked out for him. What could he possibly say that people will go, hadn't thought of that before, hadn't heard that before?
Well, the campaign is signaling there will be surprises. And I recall that Donald Trump Jr.'s version of a Father's Day surprise for his father was to tape an episode of Triggered in which he claimed to unveil evidence that Osama bin Laden endorsed Joe Biden. So maybe that's the big surprise. I mean,
it's diamond and silk. There's going to be something with diamond and silk. It's got to be.
So guys, I don't recommend trying this at home, but because everybody's watching from home. But it would be an awesome drinking game every time they mention Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden, take a drink, because it's going to be that. Okay, so this morning, I have to mention this. We had 24 former members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, including Senator Jeff Flake, announcing not only that they are not going to be supporting Donald Trump, but they're going to be voting for Joe Biden, Republicans for Biden. 24 former Republican office holders, and a lot of them relatively prominent. David, you've made it clear that you're one of them. Does this make a difference? Does it make a difference that a guy like Jeff Flake is going, you know what, I can't support Trump, and I am going to vote for Joe Biden?
I love that question, Charlie, because it was the same question around John Kasich speaking at the RNC or at the DNC. Does it change opinions? I don't know that it changes opinions as much as it's an affirmation of an existing coalition, and people know that they have a home in that. And I think what we're seeing from the Republicans, what I love about what we're seeing from some of these Republicans, is the emergence of values-based politics. And Charlie, I think you've actually written some on this or commented on this, that it is not ideologically based politics, right? Most of them are happy to say, look, I'm arm's length from some of the ideologies of even Joe Biden, not just the Democratic platform, but I believe in some fundamental shared values around law and order and democracy and electoral reform. And my question, and I admit to some self-interest because of my involvement in a group called the Serve America Movement that approaches politics in that same way. My question is, where does this coalition go after this election? Because I would have a hard time saying if you're engaging in values-based politics ahead of ideology, it's hard to return back to the Republican Party. But if ideology is keeping you from the Democratic Party, is there an opportunity for a growing values-based political movement? I personally think there is. I'm involved in one, but I'm looking at the Flakes and the Kasichs and the others to see, where do you go next?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I guess I look at it this way that I mean, maybe if you'd asked me 6 months ago, would I be willing to say I'm going to vote for Joe Biden? I would have said, you know what, I'm going to be anti-Trump. I'm going to keep my head down on all of that. Because that's my focus. I'm not prepared to buy into the Democratic Party, like you said before, David. I don't want to. I don't want to go from one tribe to another tribe. Not prepared to do that at all. But what is interesting, watching one after another of these figures emerge, it does provide, to use the phrase, the permission structure. Our colleagues at Republican Voters Against Trump, showing grassroots people saying, these are people like me, these are people I know, these are people who I trust. The number of national security officials that served under Republican administrations that are willing to sign these letters, so that there's been a lot of times over the last 4 years where I really felt, and I know you guys have felt the same way, very much alone with this tiny minority within a minority of people out on a desert island. When you see things like this, it does validate it, and I think it might actually provide some cover to some squishy Republicans who, really have a hard time getting over that hump of actually ever voting for a Democrat. What do you think, Amanda?
Well, I think there is a little bit of the team politics at play here, and let me explain. A lot of people always want to know, will this make a difference? Will this make a difference? You have to look at the choices that Donald Trump has made that led to this. Whether it comes to Republicans who are voting for Trump or who have just left the party, no matter what they're doing, Donald Trump has decided as a candidate and a policymaker to surround himself with people like Paul Manafort, Steve Bannon, both got steel bracelets, endorsed somebody like Roy Moore, and drove those people out. I mean, there are just so many clear choices made here. And it wasn't like he didn't have people that were trying to help him, the Kristen Nielsens, all the people that tried to give him good advice. And again, he chose the wrong path. And so it's this idea of, what is Trump's team look like and who's everybody else? Because when I look, if I match up the people like, David Jolly and Charlie Dent and all these people, I'd rather be on that team. And I don't know where they're going next, but that's the group of people I want to be with.
Yeah, I think that's also part of it, is you choose which club you want to be a member of. Okay, so I know that this is the most talked about. I'm switching subjects now. This is the single most talked about story in politics in America today, and none of us actually want to overtly talk about it. You know what I'm getting at here? I'm talking about the whole Conway thing, and it's really awkward because we're talking about somebody's family, and I think that's sensitive. On the other hand, it's hard not to just take a step back and think, there have been so many ways in which Trumpism has ripped this country apart. And I don't want to make it symbolic because these are real people with real issues and real children and everything. But watching the Kellyanne Conway, George Conway drama playing out in such high profile just reminds me of the friendships that have been broken, the families that have been torn apart, and all, how this country has really been on edge. Amanda, I don't want to make too much of it, but it's such a disturbing and depressing scenario.
Yeah, I think we've all lost friends, colleagues, people we used to work closely with through this era, and I can't imagine losing my family over it potentially. But this is very sadly what Donald Trump does. It happens to his own family. I mean, his niece Mary Trump is releasing tapes speaking to his bad character, and it's because he always chooses the lowest road. And it's just it's hard to watch. You can wish him the best, but this is more an indictment, I think, of Trump than the Conways. Because listen, if you were going to work in the White House with Kellyanne's role, that should be the proudest moment of your life. And she may look back on it and see that it was her worst.
Yeah, I mean, David, you're a dad. Parenting is very, very difficult. I have to say, when I read that, it took me back to realize, how much both of them are giving up. And it does strike me as a family issue. I know the built-in cynicism is when people say, I'm leaving this position or dropping out of this race or resigning because I want to spend more time with my family. That's almost always not true. I actually think that this is one of those cases where it was. And again, I don't want to get too deep into what a teenager is doing. And I think it was incredibly tasteless of people who tried to exploit this 15-year-old girl's issues about this. But clearly, George Conway is in the midst of the fight of his life. Now he's stepping back from Twitter. He's stepping back from the Lincoln Project. Kellyanne Conway is leaving a high-profile job in the White House several months before an election. Yeah. And I mean, that's not nothing in terms of what they are giving up for their family.
Sure. And look, there's another approach, which is to commend them for giving this up to take care of their family. And I'm of the like that when you're in the arena, all bets are off, all gloves are off. The fight is fair, and it is fair to judge people's decisions they make in the arena. It is fair to judge George Conway, and it's fair to judge Kellyanne Conway, and it's fair to judge the hand that she played in policies around immigration and taxes and healthcare and education, because that is part of her legacy. But outside of the arena, I think we are all connected by the very human condition that is family. And we know for George and Kellyanne, there has been some public, some public reporting around their children and some very outspokenness of one of their teenage daughters. And it's clear that they have a family matter to deal with. And in that regard, I can set the arena aside and say, my sympathies, my empathy is with George and Kellyanne. My support is with them. And I hope this is the right decision and it's right for their family. And in many ways, I commend them for putting their family first, because at the end of the day, look, what's more important, family or politics? We can talk about the fate of the world, but if the fate of your family's in trouble, I think all of us rush to family first.
Okay. So Amanda Carpenter, your hot take, what should we be watching over the next 4 days of the Republican convention? By the way, you know how unfair it is to like pop a question like that on somebody. But I know you're a cable TV. You guys are like cable, which means that you always know that you have to have an answer. So the one thing you can't say on cable is, "Hey, let me think about that and get back to you later." Right? You can't say, "I don't know." So I figure that you'd either be able to answer this because you have to do it live, or you guys will be able to fake it in such a way that no one will know you're faking it. So,
well, I sort of told you before, because it's the truth. It's the speeches by possible 2024 contenders. The top three are going to be Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, and Kristi Noem. You could throw Don Jr. into there. I don't think he's ready to run for president in 2024, but couldn't you see him running for, say, governor of Florida, one of the western states where he likes to go hunt and kill large animals? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's true. I was just flashing back to 4 years ago, one of the worst moments of punditry, not by me, but by others who were, remember that whole period like, okay, so Donald Trump has issues, but his kids are so wonderful. I mean, these are impressive children. It's like 4 years of Don Jr., Eric Trump, Ivanka. Yeah, it's like, okay,
why are we still listening to Jared Kushner do coronavirus messaging?
Yeah.
That is just still so unbelievable to me. I mean, basically, the kids are his henchmen. Still.
Oh, yeah.
They're the only people that go on TV anymore and are doing the messaging and the speaking on his behalf. And so I guess that would be the other thing we need to look for Jared and Ivanka's post-Trump positioning.
Okay, so David, hot take. What are you going to be looking for in the next 4 days?
Look, I think the Democrats were a little short on actually speaking to the very constituencies that swung this election. In Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, the relatively white labor working class. And I found that curious that they didn't lean more into that. I'm curious if Trump goes that direction, because he has to perfectly replicate the 2016 coalition. I doubt he will. I think it will be more just a celebration of all things Trump that will turn people off. But in that, and I want to add one thing if I can here, Charlie, because I think there's been a great conversation about voters, Republican voters for Biden, the conversation around Kasich and Flake, and even in reflection, Amanda's comment about wishing Trump could be a great president, or perhaps he could have been a great president. And I'll admit, within some of my broader family and social networks, people who have said, boy, I can't imagine voting for Joe Biden, but I just can't vote for Donald Trump. And I think at this point in the election, it's important if you find yourself in that situation. I think the three of us would be somewhat representative, at least on the edges of that group. We
Yeah, I
have to
know people
remind
like that.
ourselves about the last 3 years. I mean, this was a president who tried to cheat in this election with the Ukraine, a president who asked Russia for help, a president who separated moms from their kids, a president who refuses to give us his tax return, who's been indicted in the Southern District of New York, who continues to embarrass us on the world stage, who suggested abandoning NATO, who has no response for Russian bounties on the heads of American soldiers, who lies to us about a pandemic and our public health. It is. I'm of the ilk in politics. You always say, "Give me something to vote for, not to vote against." This election might be the anomaly. There is so much to vote against in this election that I think this week at the convention we will be reminded of that, because the dishonesty of all things Trump world will be so obvious to people who have been paying attention the last 3 years.
Yeah, and I think there's so many voters ought to go into the pool of the voting booth and whatever they do now, and ask themselves, can you really take 4 more years of this? I mean, the prospect of a second term of Donald Trump has got to be exhausting and depressing, even to Republicans who realize that they're going to have to continue to defend and rationalize and look the other way. I guess the only way around this is what Amanda was talking about, is just terrify people so much to make them think that the Democrats are just, the real existential threat to the nation, but also that they hate you and they despise you and they want to burn you down. And we are going to see lots of images of burning cities because that's frankly what they got. There's no way that you do the Hope and Optimism convention at this moment. Amanda Carpenter, David Jolly, thank you so much for coming on the podcast for our special convention coverage on this Monday. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks.
Hey, good to be with each of you.
And thank you for listening to today's Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. There are now just 70 days to go until the general election.